The call came just after 10 a.m., right in the middle of a beauty shoot in downtown LA. Haley was touching up her lipstick, listening to the photographer bark lighting adjustments, when her phone buzzed in her bag. Mom. She almost didn't answer. But something about the timing, the silence before it rang, made her pick up. "Hey, sweetie," her mom said. Her tone was overly casual, always a red flag. Haley leaned against a wall. "Everything okay?" There was a pause. Too long. "We just wanted to let you know we went ahead and sold the Westwood apartment." Haley froze. "What do you mean you sold it?" "Well, it was sitting there. You barely go anymore. It just made sense financially. And with your dad's situation, we figured—" "You didn't ask me," Haley snapped. Her voice echoed off the concrete. "You were always so sentimental about that place," her mom replied gently. "But it's just property, honey." To Haley, it wasn't just property. It was home, her first space, her grandmother's furniture. The walls still smelled like old rosewater perfume and coconut shampoo from sleepovers in her teens. She hung up without saying goodbye. And just like that, the apartment was gone, sold behind her back. And her parents had no idea what they'd just given away. By sunset, Haley was in the car, speeding across town toward Westwood. She hadn't planned it, just grabbed her keys, sunglasses, and the hoodie her grandmother once embroidered with her initials. She needed to see it with her own eyes, needed to believe it wasn't true. When she pulled up to the building, her stomach dropped. The moving truck was already there. Strangers hauled out boxes, laughing and chatting like they weren't carrying pieces of her childhood. She parked and ran inside, bypassing the front desk. The concierge, a new guy she didn't recognize, tried to stop her. "I'm sorry, miss, but this unit is no longer—" "I grew up in that apartment," she cut in, voice tight. "My grandmother lived there. My name used to be on the lease." But when she reached the door, her key didn't work. A sharp pain bloomed in her chest. She backed away slowly, watching as a woman opened the door with a box labeled kitchen and smiled politely. "You here for the welcome tour?" Haley forced a nod, blinking away tears behind her sunglasses. "No," she whispered. "I'm here to say goodbye." She left without speaking to anyone else. But in the pit of her stomach, something pulled. A feeling, a memory. And suddenly she remembered something Grandma once said. That apartment holds more than they'll ever know. The next morning, Haley sat curled on her kitchen floor, her phone on silent, untouched coffee gone cold beside her. Her mind kept going back to that apartment, not the furniture, not the art on the walls, but her grandmother. Rose Monroe, elegant without trying, tough without raising her voice, the kind of woman who made tea feel like a sacred ritual and could shut down a rude executive with one arched brow. It was Grandma Rose who first gave Haley the keys to that apartment when she turned 18. Not her parents, Rose. "I want you to have something that's yours," she'd said, holding Haley's hand with a strength that didn't match her fragile frame. Haley had laughed at the time, but now that memory hit different. She remembered something else too. An afternoon in that sun-drenched living room years ago. Grandma sipping from her porcelain cup, eyes distant. "One day," she said quietly, "they'll try to take what's not theirs. But you'll know where to look." Haley hadn't known what she meant. Until now. Suddenly, she stood. There was something Grandma left behind, something hidden. And if it was still there, maybe everything wasn't lost. She grabbed her bag. If they sold the walls, fine. But they hadn't yet found what lived inside them. That night, Haley waited until the lights in the building dimmed and the moving truck was gone. She pulled her hoodie tight, cap low, and used the old side entrance Grandma had once shown her, the one maintenance used during renovations. The halls still smelled the same, lemon oil and old carpet. Her heart pounded as she climbed the stairs instead of risking the elevator. Apartment 3B, her apartment, except it wasn't hers anymore. She pressed her ear to the door, silence. Using a thin tension rod from her bag, she carefully slid the lock. Years of watching security tutorials for acting roles were finally good for something. She stepped inside. Most of it was already stripped, furniture gone, paintings off the walls. But the creak in the third floorboard near the fireplace, still there. She knelt, heart racing, and pried it up. There it was, the small dust-covered metal box Grandma once hinted at but never confirmed. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside, a folded letter written in Grandma's elegant cursive, a faded photo of Rose as a young woman, and a small brass key. No label, no explanation, but the letter said one thing: if they sold the surface, let them. What matters is still yours. This key unlocks the part of me they never touched. Haley clutched the key, her eyes stinging. The game had changed. Haley sat in her car with the box on the passenger seat, the letter open in her lap. Her fingers traced the worn brass key, heart pounding with questions. It didn't belong to anything in the apartment. She knew every lock in that place. So what did it open? She pulled over into a coffee shop parking lot, flipped the letter to the back. There, barely visible in the corner, was a tiny handwritten address: West Crescent Bank, box number 428. Her eyes widened. A safe deposit box? She grabbed her phone and searched. The bank was still around, still private, still exactly the kind of place Grandma Rose would have trusted. It was only a 15-minute drive from where she sat. By the time Haley reached the bank, it was nearly closing. She rushed inside, breath caught in her throat. "I need access to box 428, she told the clerk, holding up the key. "Name?" the woman asked. Haley hesitated. "It's not mine. It was left to me by my grandmother, Rose Monroe." The woman looked at the screen, then smiled. "She left specific instructions. If you ever came asking, we were to let you in, alone." Minutes later, Haley stepped into a cold, private vault. She turned the key. Inside the metal box was the last thing she expected: a property deed, stock certificates, and a letter addressed only to her. "For when you feel like everything's been taken, remember, I left you something they can't touch." The townhouse was hidden behind an ivy-covered gate in an old corner of Los Feliz, a part of LA Haley had only ever driven through, never really seen. The deed said it had been in her grandmother's name since 1993, quietly paid off, never mortgaged. No one in the family had ever mentioned it. She stood on the sidewalk, staring at the gate. The key in her hand didn't feel like brass anymore. It felt like a door back to something real. The lock clicked open easily. The yard was overgrown, but not wild. Just forgotten. Like it had been waiting for someone. The townhouse itself was 2 stories, brick and stone, old wood trim on the windows, and a faded bronze number plate by the door: 1264. She opened the front door. No alarm, no staged furniture, no smell of fresh paint. This wasn't a flip, this was a home. Inside, dust danced in sunbeams through sheer curtains. Books still lined the built-in shelves. A tea set rested on the sideboard, just as her grandmother would have left it. And there on the entry table, another note: "If you found this, you didn't give up. Good, because this place is yours now, not in name, in purpose." Haley blinked back tears. Her parents may have sold what they thought was valuable, but her grandmother had left her something they could never put a price on. Haley wandered the room slowly, fingers grazing the furniture like she was touching memories. The kitchen had copper pots still hanging above the stove, mismatched ceramic mugs lined up by the sink. Upstairs, the bedroom smelled faintly of lavender and old books. Nothing about the place screamed luxury, yet it felt richer than anything she'd ever owned. She opened a closet and found vintage coats wrapped in cloth. On a shelf above them, a shoebox labeled "Letters I Never Sent." She didn't open them yet. Not yet. In the back room, she found a narrow door she hadn't noticed before. It led to a study, dim and quiet. A dust-covered piano against one wall. And on the desk, a leather-bound journal with her name embossed in gold foil. "Haley," she opened it gently. The first page read, "If you're reading this, they probably took the apartment. That's all right. I never trusted your parents to understand value the way you do. That's why I bought this place in your name, through a trust they'd never trace. This house is yours, not to live in, but to dream in. Keep it quiet. Keep it sacred." Haley sat down slowly, the weight of it all pressing gently on her chest. Her grandmother hadn't just saved a home. She'd saved Haley's space to become uninterrupted, unbothered, and finally free. Haley lit a candle and curled up on the velvet chair by the window, Grandma's journal resting in her lap. The pages were yellowed, ink slightly faded, but the handwriting was still unmistakably hers. It started soft. Notes about tea blends, old neighbors, garden plans. Then it changed. One entry began. I never should have trusted them with the apartment. They care about image. I care about roots. Haley's fingers tightened on the journal. Another entry, dated just after Haley's high school graduation, read, They told me Haley didn't need the space anymore, that they'd manage it. I knew what that meant. Sell it the second I'm gone. Her grandmother had seen it coming, and she hadn't said a word, because instead, she made her own plan, bought the townhouse, created a trust, and protected Haley's future from the people meant to protect her. One final entry caught her breath. Haley's like me. She feels too much and hides it too well. They'll underestimate her, just like they did me, but she'll surprise them. One day she'll open this journal and realize, I didn't leave her money, I left her freedom. Haley closed the book slowly, tears clinging to her lashes. This wasn't just a house, it was a message. And now, she was ready to answer it. Haley didn't schedule a call. She didn't warn them. She just showed up. Her parents' Bel Air home was as sterile as ever. White orchids, gray velvet, and silence thick enough to slice. Her mother answered the door with a tight smile that faded quickly when she saw Haley's face. We need to talk, Haley said flatly. Now. They sat in the living room, her father nursing a scotch, her mother clutching a cashmere throw like a shield. You sold it without telling me, Haley began. My name was never off the original paperwork. Legally, you needed my consent. Her father exhaled sharply. You're being dramatic. No, Haley said. You're being dishonest. She pulled out a folder and set it on the table. Inside, a copy of the original lease, the trust deed to the townhouse, and a photo of the brass key with her grandmother's note. Her mother blinked. What is this? It's what Grandma left me, Haley replied. She knew you'd try something like this. They were speechless. I know you're in debt, she continued, voice steady. And I know you thought the apartment was yours to liquidate. Her father finally spoke. We were trying to protect what's left of the family's name. You weren't protecting anything, Haley said. You were selling the only part of this family that ever meant something real. The next morning, Haley met with her lawyer in a quiet, upscale office downtown. The windows overlooked the city, but her eyes stayed locked on the thick stack of documents between them. Your claim's strong, the lawyer said, flipping through the pages. Your name was never formally removed from the co-ownership. That sale happened without your written consent. Haley nodded. I want it reversed. I want it public. Her lawyer raised an eyebrow. Public? Yes, Haley said firmly. They didn't just cross a legal line. They crossed a personal one. I won't let it slide quietly. They filed the paperwork that afternoon, petitioning the court to investigate the unauthorized sale of the Westwood apartment and halt the final transfer to the new buyers. The case would make waves, especially in real estate circles. But Haley didn't flinch. Later that day, her phone buzzed. A message from her father. Is this how you want to handle this? In court? She didn't respond. Instead, she sat in the sunroom of the townhouse her grandmother left her, surrounded by the quiet warmth of old books and wooden beams. She pulled out a sketch pad, not for modeling, not for press, for herself. This space, this fight, wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about reclaiming what was hers, on her terms, and no one else's. The first thing Haley did was throw open every window in the townhouse and let the light pour in. She didn't hire a decorator, no production team, no camera crew, just her, a playlist of old soul records, and her grandmother's spirit lingering in every corner. She started with the sunroom, painted the walls herself, pulled up the old carpet and exposed warm oak flooring, hung sheer curtains that let the afternoon spill through like honey. The townhouse became her sanctuary, but not in the spa retreat, influencer sort of way. It became a place where she could breathe without permission. Downstairs, she turned the old study into a creative space. A long white table, shelves of sketchbooks, a wall where she pinned ideas, some wild, some simple, all hers. She invited no one, not yet. This wasn't for the public. It was a quiet rebellion, a reclamation of voice, vision, and bloodline. At night, she'd sit by the fireplace with tea in one of Grandma Rose's chipped mugs, rereading journal entries. One line kept echoing. Legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you protect. And Haley was finally protecting hers, not with silence, but with creation. And for the first time in months, she felt whole. When Vogue reached out for an interview, Haley hesitated. They wanted to talk about a new campaign, maybe her skincare line, something glossy, something safe. But she said no. Instead, she asked if they'd be open to a feature titled, "What Legacy Really Means." She didn't dress up for the shoot. No borrowed diamonds or airbrushed backdrops. Just her in the restored townhouse, barefoot, hair loose, sitting in the window seat her grandmother once read books by. When the article came out, it wasn't polished PR, it was raw, honest. Haley spoke openly about betrayal, about what it felt like to be blindsided by family, about the difference between inheritance and intention. She showed photos of the apartment they sold, her teenage bedroom, the chipped tile her grandma refused to fix because flaws had stories, and she spoke about the townhouse, how her grandmother protected it quietly, just like she protected Haley, how that house gave her more than real estate. It gave her a space to remember who she was without expectation. The internet lit up. Some called her brave. Others called it petty. Haley didn't care, because for once, the narrative was hers, and in telling the truth, she didn't just protect Grandma Rose's legacy. She stepped into her own. The message came late, almost midnight. Just one word. Talk. It was from her mom. Haley stared at it for a long time, then replied with a simple, "Tomorrow. Noon." The townhouse. When they arrived, they looked different. Not styled, not posed, just tired. Worn in a way that money couldn't hide. They stood in the entryway like strangers in a museum, eyes scanning the walls, the restored floorboards, the sunlight spilling through the curtains. Her mom spoke first. "I didn't know," she said softly, "about the house, about the trust, about what Rose meant it to be." Haley didn't interrupt. Her dad looked around, voice rough. "We were scared. The debts got heavier, the image, it was all falling apart. We thought the apartment was just sitting there. We didn't think you'd miss it." "You didn't ask," Haley said. "You decided." Her mom nodded, tearful. "We were wrong." There was a long silence. Then her father added something she never expected. "Your grandmother, she told me once that you saw the world clearer than we ever did. I didn't believe her back then. I do now." Haley said nothing. She didn't forgive them in that moment. But she didn't close the door either. Because boundaries weren't about punishment. They were about finally being seen. After her parents left, the townhouse felt still again, but not empty. Haley wandered upstairs, her fingers grazing the polished wood banister. The light in the hallway shifted, warm and golden, like something was pulling her gently toward the past. She ended up in the attic, a space she hadn't explored yet. Dust covered everything in a soft hush. Stacks of boxes, a folded quilt, and in the far corner, a cloth-draped frame leaning against the wall. She pulled the cover off and gasped. It was a portrait of her grandmother, not posed, not formal. Rose sat at the piano in this very house, laughing, mid-laugh in fact. Caught in motion, eyes bright, hair loose around her shoulders. It wasn't art, it was life. Taped to the back of the canvas was a yellowing envelope addressed in the same script Haley knew by heart. One last reminder. She opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten note. "This home is yours, Haley. Not because I left it to you, but because you knew how to return to it. Don't ever shrink inside these walls. Stretch. Fill every corner. Be as bold as I always knew you would be." Haley placed the portrait above the fireplace. Not as decoration, as a declaration. She was done shrinking. Weeks later, the townhouse was no longer silent. Laughter echoed off freshly painted walls, friends chatted in the kitchen, and soft jazz played from an old speaker in the corner. Haley stood barefoot in the living room, holding a glass of wine, eyes scanning the space that had once felt like a secret. Now, it felt like home. Her closest friends sat on velvet cushions she'd picked herself. No stylists, no press, no filters. Just real connection. She gave them the tour, showing off the sunroom, the study, even Grandma's favorite reading nook. Everyone paused at the portrait above the fireplace. "Is that your grandma?" one friend asked. Haley smiled, a little mist in her eyes. Yeah, the original rebel. That night, as the last guest trickled out, she stood at the front steps, cool breeze brushing her face. She looked back at the glowing windows, the gentle hum of quiet comfort inside. It hit her then what this really was. Not revenge, not a power move, but return to who she was before the noise, to who Grandma always saw in her, to a version of home that no one could sell or steal. She didn't just reclaim a building, she reclaimed her name, and now, the legacy was hers to define, on her terms and no one else's.